August 16, 1977, Graceland, Memphis. A desperate call rang out from Elvis Presley's mansion. When paramedics arrived, they found the king of rock and roll lying motionless on his bathroom floor. His body, once worshipped by millions, was bloated and unrecognizable. His skin was damp, his pulse non-existent. By the time he arrived at the hospital, it was over. At just 42 years old, the most famous musician on the planet was pronounced dead. The official cause? Heart failure. The truth, far more complicated. Elvis wasn't just a man, he was an industry, and that industry squeezed every last bit of life out of him. By the time he died, he was a prisoner in his own home, addicted to prescription drugs, unable to escape the machine that had once built him up and then spat him out. But how did it come to this? How did Elvis Presley, the golden boy of American music, die alone, surrounded by pills and broken dreams? To understand the end, we need to go back to the beginning. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8, 1935 in Tupelo, Mississippi. But from the very start, his life was marked by tragedy. He wasn't born alone. He had a twin brother, Jesse Garon Presley, who was stillborn. His mother, Gladys, never fully recovered from the loss, pouring every ounce of love and protection into Elvis. He was her world, and she was his. The Presleys were poor, dirt poor. Their tiny home had no luxuries, and Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, struggled to keep a steady job. The family barely survived on government aids and odd jobs. But through it all, one thing remained constant: music. Elvis was raised on gospel, blues, and country, sounds that soaked into his soul. At just 10 years old, he performed his first song in a talent show. He didn't win, but something inside him had been set on fire. By the time he was a teenager, he had a cheap guitar and a dream. And in Memphis, Tennessee, that dream would become reality. In 1953, an 18-year-old Elvis walked into Sun Records and paid to record a song as a gift for his mother. The studio's owner, Sam Phillips, noted something unusual about the young man. His voice had a raw, emotional quality that was impossible to ignore. Phillips had been looking for a white singer who could capture the power and soul of black music. And Elvis was the answer. In 1954, he recorded That's All Right, a song that fused blues, country, and rock into something completely new. When it hit the airwaves, the reaction was electric. Suddenly, Elvis wasn't just another kid with a guitar. He was something America had never seen before. By 1956, he had a recording contract, a movie deal, and a nickname that would follow him forever: the King of Rock and Roll. His performances were pure energy. He didn't just stand and sing. He moved. He shook, thrusted, and danced like no white performer had before. It drove teenage girls wild. It terrified parents. When he performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, the cameras infamously filmed him only from the waist up to avoid showing his scandalous hip movements. America was obsessed.
Elvis Presley.
But fame came at a cost. Elvis wasn't just a musician, he was a product, and no one understood that better than Colonel Tom Parker, the man who would shape Elvis's career and ultimately destroy him. Parker wasn't a real colonel. He was a former carnival worker with a shady past. But he had a vision. Elvis wasn't just going to be a singer, he was going to be a brand. Under Parker's control, Elvis's life became a relentless cycle of touring, recording, and filming cheap Hollywood movies. The king was no longer in charge. His manager was. At first, Elvis played along. The money was good, the fame intoxicating. But as the years went by, the cracks started to show. By the mid-60s, rock and roll had changed. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones ruled the charts. And Elvis, he was stuck in bad movies and forgettable songs. For the first time, the king was irrelevant. But in 1968, he fought back. The 68 comeback special was a turning point. Dressed in all black leather, standing in front of a live audience, Elvis reminded the world who he was. He wasn't just a movie star, he was a performer, and when he sang, the world stopped to listen. The special was a smash hit. He was back. But Colonel Parker had other plans. Instead of letting Elvis tour the world, Parker locked him into a Las Vegas contract, a grueling schedule of constant performances, night after night. It was a golden cage. Vegas paid millions, but it drained him. To keep up, Elvis turned to prescription drugs, uppers to perform, downers to sleep. The cycle was endless, and it was killing him. By the early 70s, his marriage to Priscilla was over. His health was deteriorating. The Elvis Presley people had once idolized was disappearing before their eyes. And in his final years, he was barely holding on. By the mid-1970s, Elvis Presley was no longer the king. He was a prisoner, trapped by his own fame, controlled by Colonel Tom Parker, and numbed by a toxic cocktail of prescription drugs. He was living on borrowed time. Elvis had always been larger than life, but now his body was failing him. His once chiseled features were swollen, his movements sluggish. He suffered from chronic pain, severe insomnia, and an ever-worsening dependence on drugs. Every day was a battle, and he was losing. On stage, he tried to hold on to the legend he once was, but fans could see the truth. His voice, though still powerful, was often drowned by exhaustion. His words slurred. His eyes, once full of fire, now looked hollow. The man who had set the world on fire with his music was now struggling just to stand. Off stage, it was even worse. His diet had spiraled out of control. He gorged on deep-fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, massive platters of bacon, and milkshakes thick enough to clog arteries on sight. Food was no longer just fuel. It was an escape, a way to fill the void left by his loneliness. He was only 42, but he felt much older. In the early hours of August 16, Elvis couldn't sleep. He paced Graceland's halls, restless. His body was failing, but his mind was fixated on something else. At some point during the night, he picked up a book, The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus. It was about the Shroud of Turin, the famous relic believed to bear the image of Christ. Was Elvis searching for salvation? Did he know the end was near? At around 9:30 a.m., his fiancée Ginger Alden found him on the floor of his bathroom, collapsed near the toilet. His face was buried in the shag carpet, his body twisted unnaturally. The man who once ruled the world now lay lifeless, alone in the most undignified way possible. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. At 3:30 p.m., doctors at Baptist Memorial Hospital pronounced Elvis Presley dead. The official cause? Heart failure. But his body told another story. Decades of drug abuse, stress, and a brutal lifestyle had finally caught up to him. The world moaned. Fans flooded Graceland, sobbing in the streets. Television networks played his greatest performances, reminding everyone of what was lost. But behind the grief, there were questions. How did it come to this? Did Colonel Parker push him past his limits for money? Did the people around him enable his downfall instead of saving him? Or was Elvis simply trapped in a system that chews up stars and spits them out when they're no longer profitable? One thing was clear. Elvis Presley didn't die a king. He died a prisoner. a prisoner of fame, a prisoner of addiction, a prisoner of the people who claimed to love him. And as his body was laid to rest in Graceland, one haunting question lingered. If Elvis had walked away from it all, could he have saved himself?